Hi, I'm John Cate, lead singer and songwriter of the Van Gogh Brothers, on behalf of the Music Museum of New England, a nonprofit enterprise dedicated to capturing the popular musical history of New England. With me today is Ryan Walsh, founder of the Americana band Hallelujah the Hills and author of Astral Weeks, A Secret History of 1968, which chronicles Van Morrison's time in Boston during the period, as well as the evolution of music and culture in Boston during that time. Welcome back, Ryan.
Thank you. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again. Our third segment is my favorite, which you touch on in your wonderful book, and I call this the spiritual revolution. So how do Boston and Van factor into this spiritual revolution in Boston, which I enjoyed because of your allusions to a sense of spirituality in the late 60s and early 70s. I remember that feeling in the air here, literally in the air. And I have my own drawings done at that time, one of which I just texted to you. Let's start with a question, okay, kind of based around that. And that's, do you think that there was a sort of a spiritual convergence here with Tim Leary and Richard Alpert's psychedelic experience, the alternative lifestyle, such as Mel Lyman? Do you think there was some sort of spiritual convergence?
Well, based on the stories I kept finding with the book, yes. I mean, one interviewee told me it was the age of the Bodhisattvas. In other words, everyone thought they were God. And there was just this, whether you had accessed it through music or hallucinogens or through meditation or a guru, it was on a lot of people's minds and tip of the tongue to see if there was existence beyond the body, beyond what we know is reality. And I'm very interested in that. And then what was truly shocking was to learn that 100 years later, at the kind of birth of spiritualism, Boston was the mecca of that. And spiritualism is the sect of religion that believes, you can contact people who died through all kinds of, divining methods. And Boston was kind of known as like the place to go if you needed to access the astral plane. Even Mary Todd Lincoln went here to attend some famous medium seances to try and contact her dead husband, President Lincoln.
Wow, what a great aspect of all that. I don't think people think of Boston as being a particularly spiritual place. I think people think of Boston as being a great sports town. I think,
or if they think about religion at all, they think of Irish Catholics. I think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. So to kind of unearth this kind of unusual precedent, kind of made a lot of the '68 stories make more sense to me. Just the fact that it wasn't out of the blue; it had been here before. But yeah, I mean, there just seemed to be the zeitgeist of the moment was to kind of seemingly transcend normal human existence, for lack of a better term.
And we hear a lot about that with respect to, and I started with this with Tim Leary and Richard Alpert, of course, but there was something else that had nothing to do with drugs. There was definitely that, and I use the word confluence, and perhaps I'm overusing it, but there was a confluence of events. There was something else going on, perhaps nationwide, worldwide at the time, and of course there've been many movies and documentaries and books about that. Here in Boston, though, there was something very very tangible and very vibrant. I think of it as a heightened spirituality, and of course people talk about the hippies and that whole thing in spiritual terms at times. Do you think that that heightened spirituality here in Boston, one of many places probably, but do you think that heightened spirituality informed Astral Weeks?
Uh, it's a hard question to answer, definitively, but I kind of make the case that it makes sense that Astral Weeks comes out of after a residency here, just because it's he's never written a song about being born again or the things you hear in the lyrics to that title track, and I'm pretty sure he wrote that song while he was in Boston.
Wow.
But he's also, he views radios as kind of magical items with a pipe in voices from other places, which is kind of how he views his songwriting sometimes. So then in that context, thinking of him staying up all night at BCN with Peter Wolf, kind of you look at that in a different light. And producer Louis Merenstein, at the end of his life, I was his final interview, and he looks back at Astral Weeks and thinks the whole album is coded spirituality. So you could view Madame George as a domino playing drag queen, or as the God figure that Van Morrison meets in the middle of that album.
In that way, and this really fascinated me. Van lived in Cambridge at the home of at the family home of his was it his bass player?
Oh no, I mean they had their own apartment. He wanted to move into John Sheldon's house, but the mom said no.
Oh, I misunderstood. Did they host other artists there, or
it was kind of a clubhouse for all kinds of musicians and artists, but they just wanted the family actually living there.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
So that was more something that Van was projecting rather than reality. Yeah.
Well, Van asked the mom if he could move in, and she said no.
Okay, right. Well, that's pretty direct.
Yeah. James Taylor was hanging out at that house. James Taylor is who helped taught future Van Morrison guitarists to play guitar. So quite a storied house, and John Sheldon has a memory of Van just sitting in a chair in a sunny backyard, strumming those songs that would soon be on Astral Weeks, and it's a beautiful memory for him.
That image of Van in Cambridge in their backyard, playing those songs, is, I think, one of the most beautiful moments of the book.
Oh, thanks. I was really taken by it when John told me about it and said that's got to be in the story. Yeah, you
can picture it. You can just picture it, or I could picture it in my mind's eye when I read that, and remembering the feeling and the smell of incense, and the feeling in the air in Cambridge in those years. I could very, very much picture that. And thinking about my own experiences in that time, and the images that you bring to life in your book, just sort of gave reality to, as I mentioned yesterday, feelings that people had at the time. It brought it, it made it very, very real, coming from your perspective. Do you think that there's a heightened spirituality as a common thread in Astral Weeks in your book? Do you think this heightened spirituality is a thread of your book?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, I'm interested in that kind of stuff, and so when people are at a certain city and time running around saying they're God, I'm going to pay attention, because people aren't doing that right now. For instance, people are. I found that not a lot of people want to talk about spirituality or what life really is, or can you what's the purpose of music? And I'm really interested in that stuff, and I do find it's a scant subject, and so it was a pleasure to find all those stories and write about them in the book.
That's so cool. Do you think of music as a means of communication, a spiritual communication?
Yeah, I do. I think if there's anything that's magic in the world, it's songs. I mean, they're they're a combination of words and sounds, and they make people feel different. That's like a spell, but positive spell. Yeah.
Me too. I think it's our way of communicating with the spiritual world.
Well,
And
people often, I write a lot of songs, and I'll get a question, what did that song mean? And it's hard to answer because a lot of times, if I could have said what it meant without using the song, I probably wouldn't have written the song.
well said. Well said. I've never heard it described that way. That's great. I've heard that I'm a channel for music.
Uh-huh.
I've heard I need to open myself to the music that's coming through me, but I've
Mhm.
never heard it described that way. That's great. If I could say it, I wouldn't have written it. Is kind of, I'm paraphrasing now, but that's sort of what you're saying. If I could say how this felt, I might not have written this song. That's a beautiful thing. Certainly true of Astral Weeks, and I don't think that the feeling of that record could be described in any other way but music.
Yes, absolutely.
So I appreciate your thoughts on that, Ryan, and I'm glad I'm really glad that you brought about this spiritual connection through the events of that time. We'll have to talk about that some more sometime. And thanks for getting into that today.
Sure, my pleasure.
Great. So we'll move to New York in our next segment.
All right, good. Let's do it.